Introducing the SSPP. The purpose of this video is to introduce the Systematic Supports Planning process, or the SSPP as we like to call it.
The SSPP is a planning process that educators use to plan supports for students with IEPs in general education classrooms.
A student with an IEP has been determined to be eligible for special education services. Special education services can be delivered in different settings, but should be delivered in the general education classroom whenever possible. If a student can learn in the general education class, then it is the least restrictive environment, or the LRE, for that student.
It is the law. Students with IEPs should be educated in the LRE. So teachers are obligated by law to provide the best supports they can to help a student be successful.
And the SSPP is a process to help teachers identify and arrange the best supports for a student.
Are supports the same as supplementary aids and services?
Supplementary aids and services is a legal phrase, and supports are more of an informal term. But they can be thought of as meaning the same thing because they serve the same purpose. Their purpose is to help a student benefit from instruction in the general education classroom.
So, how do supports help a student?
Some supports improve student competency. An example of this type of support is a student who has a behavior intervention plan. There was a student who was frequently out of her seat. After analyzing the behavior and the situation in which it occurred, the student was taught how to use a checklist to monitor her out-of-seat behavior, and she received increased adult attention, which she really craved, for making progress and staying at her desk when the class schedule called for it. The support, a behavior intervention plan, was used to teach the student to be more aware of her out-of-seat behavior and to record when she was in and out of her seat. Over time, she became more competent in monitoring her own behavior and staying in her seat when she was supposed to. Eventually, she no longer needed the support of a behavior intervention plan because of her increased competency. She wasn't out of her seat any more than the other students.
Some supports improve the accessibility of the classroom.
An example of this type of support is a student who used an assistive technology device that enabled him to do an assignment that he otherwise would have great difficulty completing. Specifically, he used the SimWriter program during writing class. This student experienced much more difficulty reading and writing than most other students in his class. Every day, they were given a writing prompt in the class, and students were expected to prepare a written response to the prompt. Although several other approaches were used in literacy instruction for this student, in regard to this part of the school day, the student was allowed to use a computer with the SimWriter app on it. SimWriter is a simple supportive word processor that allows a student to select pictures that correspond to words when writing, instead of typing or writing out the letters and words. The availability of SimWriter in the classroom was a support that made the writing assignment far more accessible to him. Finally, some supports improve the accessibility of the classroom and the competency of the student. An example of this type of support is a student who learns to take notes during history class and has a peer take notes as well and share a copy of their notes with him. The student's teachers had worked with him on a note-taking strategy, and he did his best to apply it during class. But having another student, who was an excellent note-taker, share their notes with the student served two purposes. It allowed the student to practice note-taking, evaluate his note-taking progress, and improve his competency. It also made sure that the critical content that needed to be in the student's notes was not missing. Therefore, this support made the class content more accessible to the student and increased the student's competency.
There are so many possible ways to support a student, and it's important to not over or under support a student.
And that is where the SSPP comes in. It is a problem-solving process that helps teachers identify and arrange the right supports for a student with an IEP. Teachers move through a series of questions, and by answering the questions, they come up with a support plan.
What are the questions? What are the inflection points?
The three overarching questions are: what to teach, how to teach, and how to promote participation. All of these will be covered in more detail in the next video about the app, but we'll finish this video by explaining each question briefly.
The first overarching question is what to teach, and by extension, what a student should learn. The critical questions for educators to answer requires them to identify what is taught in the general education curriculum and what content outside the general education curriculum is also important for the student to learn. Once this information is gathered, educators must take the essential action of prioritizing learning goals. Curricular adaptations, the first major category of supports for students, will be the outcome of this phase of the planning process.
The second overarching question is how to teach, to offer the student the best opportunity to achieve the prioritized goals that were identified in the first phase of the SSPP. The critical questions are: what pedagogies are used to teach content in the general education setting, and what pedagogies traditionally associated with special education are likely to maximize learning? The outcome of the second phase of the SSPP will be the identification of instructional supports, the second major category of student supports.
The third overarching question is how to promote participation. That is, how to support students so that they are fully engaged in classroom learning activities. There are two critical questions to answer. How can student schedules be organized to align student learning needs with the learning activities in the general education classroom? And what instruction, if any, needs to occur elsewhere? The identification of participation supports that promote the full engagement of a student in learning activities within the general education classroom, as well as within other school settings, are the third major category of supports and the result of this phase of the SSPP.
Although this may seem like a lot to manage and keep track of, the SSPP brings it all together in an app. Educators move through the app step by step, and when they are done, they have a supports plan they can use with their students and share with the student and parent.
And our next videos will focus on how to use the app. So we'll see you next time.